Forests have been used as hiding places since the earliest days of humanity. You never know what you're going to find when you go walking in the woods. Perhaps you'll stumble across a crumbling castle. Maybe Robin Hood and his merry men will be there waiting for you. Perhaps that's a little unlikely, but no more unlikely than some of the things you're about to see in this video. Let's start off in Mexico City, Mexico, with La Isla de las Muñecas, or to translate that into English, the Island of the Dolls. The unusual name is an accurate description of what you'll find there. It's a forest on an island, and hanging from almost every tree is a decomposing doll. It might not be an exaggeration to say that this is one of the creepiest places on Earth. The story behind it is even creepier. More than half a century ago, a man named Don Julian Santana left his family, including his young child, and moved on to an island in Texulio Lake alone. He claims he saw a young girl drown in the lake, although his relatives say he probably made that up. In a twisted attempt to pay tribute to her memory, he hung dolls from the trees around his island home. Rather than buying the toys, he fished them out of the trash. He even filled his cabin with dolls, dressing them up in baby clothes. Nobody knows why he did this, and we'll never find out now. In 2001, Santana was chillingly found drowned in the same place he claims he saw the girl meet her fate. That opening story was like something from a horror movie, so let's move swiftly along to something more wholesome. Here's Wistmans Wood in Devon, England. It's been described as the most perfect fairy tale forest in the world, and it's easy to see why. It's just as easy to see why the woods are connected to myths and legends about ghosts, fairies, spirits, and mysterious druids. The rocky ground around the trees makes this area almost impossible to develop, which is why the ancient wood has been allowed to grow undisturbed for thousands of years. Local residents warn tourists that at night, the woods are full of so-called wished hounds, large black dogs with glowing red eyes and a taste for human flesh. It's entirely possible druids enter the woods to conduct rituals among the many standing stones in the woods, but there's no evidence to support the idea. Like everything else connected to Wistman's Woods, the tales are more likely to be fantasy than reality. But then this is a place that can easily feed your imagination. Like the Island of the Dolls, everything you need to know about the Blue Forest in Halle, Belgium can be discerned from its name. You have to come here at the right time of the year to witness the woods in all their blue glory though. When spring rolls around, bluebells grow so thickly across the forest floor that they look like a shimmering carpet. There are millions of bluebells here, but the carpet effects are only visible between April and May. You'll find plenty of tourists and visitors walking through the woods during that brief period, much to the bemusement and possible irritation of the rabbits and deer who call the place home. The variety of trees is almost as noteworthy as the bluebells. There are larch trees, giant sequoia, beech, pine, ash, and oak trees. Over 100 different species of birds live among their branches. It's a nature enthusiast's paradise and also a fine place to come and get some pictures to spruce up your Instagram account. Just keep an eye out for the foxes. They might not be as friendly as the rest of the residents. Travel around 25 miles downstream of Cincinnati into Kentucky, and you'll come across an abandoned ship in the middle of the forest, nestled in a tiny creek. When she first sailed, and also when she last sailed, she was known as the Celt, but she had many other names between those times. She's not looking her best these days, but when she launched in 1902 from Wilmington, Delaware, she was a luxury yacht built for a railroad millionaire named J. Rogers Maxwell. She found herself called up for military service during the First World War, renamed as the USS Sachem. By the time of the Great Depression, she was a chartered fishing boat, and then re-entered the U.S. Navy as the USS Fennecyte in 1941 as a training vessel for soldiers learning how to use sonar equipment. After exiting the military again, she became the Captain Martin, thought to be one of the first party boats in American history. The party days didn't last, so her next job was to ferry tourists around New York City under the name Sightseer, and then as the Circle Line 5. At some point between then and now, she returned to her original name and appeared in Madonna's music video for Papa Don't Preach, before being abandoned in mysterious circumstances. This is no way to treat a vessel with such a rich history. Nesco Ghost Forest in Oregon, USA doesn't look much like a forest, but that's because it was buried under a sandy beach for hundreds of years. The decaying stumps that line the Tillamook coast were once tall Sitka spruce trees that stood proudly for more than 2,000 years, but fell victim to an earthquake in the year 1700. The quake was so violent that the ground beneath the trees dropped into the tidal zone and flooded, burying the trees in mud and sand. It took a huge storm in 1997 to blast away the sand and expose them to the air again. According to scientists, these trees would once have been up to 200 feet tall. There's very little left of them today, but they found a second life more than 3 centuries after they met their doom. Today, the gaps between the trees are occupied by tide pools that play host to a variety of marine life. As for why it's called a ghost forest, it looks more than a little spooky when mist and fog descend onto the beach. If we're sticking to the truest definition of the word, a forest ought to be full of trees. We're willing to make an exception for the Shilin stone forest of Kunming, China, though, because it's such an outstanding area of natural beauty. This impressive stone forest has been standing for more than 270 million years. The unusual-looking karst formations cover an area of more than 186 square miles. If you were to stand right in the middle of it, you could easily start to feel like you'd set foot on an alien world. Getting to the middle would be quite a challenge, though. The rocks have labyrinthine qualities, and people have been known to get lost among them. The most famous stone in the whole forest is the Ashima stone, said to be the remains of a Sani girl named Ashima, who ran into the forest to flee her family after being forbidden to marry the man she loved and turned to stone as a punishment. That's obviously a myth, but the local Sani people hold an annual torch festival among the stones anyway, including dancing, dragon theater, and even a little wrestling. A few moments ago, we looked at Nesco Ghost Forest, which was buried under a beach after 2,000 years. Here's another buried forest that's even older. This is the Forest of Borth in Borth, Wales, and it's 4,500 years old. Seen from above, the objects that appear on the beach every time the tide goes out look like mossy stones, but they're actually petrified wood. Nobody even knew the forest existed until 2014, when an enormous storm blasted away several tons of sand and exposed what laid beneath. This once glorious forest contains birch, ash, and oak trees, partially preserved by the anaerobic qualities of the local peat. What's really excited local historians about this discovery, though, isn't the forest itself. It's the human-made walkways that runs through the middle of it, which still has human and animal footprints preserved on its surface. This might be proof of the existence of a civilization called Cantref Gwaelod, an Atlantis-like Welsh utopia that's said to have been lost under the waves somewhere near here. We've seen forests of wood and forests of stone. Now let's look at a forest that has a little bit of both. This is the allegedly enchanted forest of Orius in Spain. It's full of bizarre stone carvings. Nobody knows who made the carvings, when, or why. A few of the carvings resemble the famous giant heads of Easter Island, although there isn't thought to be a direct connection. Someone's gone to the trouble of carving a very realistic-looking elephant into one of the larger stones, although that looks a little more recent than the giant heads. The strangest rock in the forest even comes with a little door, with room to squeeze inside if you're small and you don't have claustrophobia. The existence of the door is connected to the myth that gnomes and goblins live in the forest. We suspect that the creation of the door came after the creation of the myth, rather than the other way around. There is a darker element to these woods, though. Every now and then, animal remains are found in the forest, implying that a cult might use this space for sacrificial rituals. It's a common belief in Scandinavia that trolls live in forests, and forests like Trollskogen are the reason why. The twisted trees of this forest in Borgholm, Sweden, lend themselves well to tales of fantasy and folklore. They've looked like this for more than 2 centuries, and owe their distinctive shapes to the strong winds that blast through the area from the Baltic Sea. The forest is at the most northeasterly point of the Swedish island of Öland, which is exposed to the extreme weather conditions that often exist in this part of the world. One side of the forest is full of these badly weathered and disfigured trees, whereas the other side, protected by a natural bay, is thick with vegetation. Once upon a time, the land was used for cattle grazing, but there are no farmers here using the land for that reason today. Right at the heart of the forest, you'll find stone circles and ancient burial cairns made by unknown hands several centuries ago. There's even an old 15th century fort hiding between the trees if you look hard enough. We now move from Sweden to Germany, where we find Sarel Rock Garden in Vonsies. These gardens were created during the 18th century and are supposed to tell the story of the son of Odysseus. The quirky gardens were commissioned by Margravine Wilhelmine, the sister of the famous German leader Frederick the Great. At the time of the commissioning, she just finished reading the 17th century French novel The Adventures of Telemachus by François Fenelon, and loved it so much that she thought the best way to express her appreciation was to create a very expensive stone tribute. Telemachus, the son of Odysseus in Greek legend, vanishes from Homer's tale for a period of the narrative. Fenelon's novel was an attempt to fill in the gaps. Specifically, Sarel is supposed to be a recreation of Ogygia, the primary setting for the book, and also the home of a nymph named Calypso. The existing rock formations in the forest were adapted and transformed into grottos, amphitheaters, and fake ruins. It was an ambitious project even for the sister of Frederick the Great, and ran out of funding before it could be completed. A thunderstorm badly damaged the gardens in 1830, after which they were abandoned for over a century before a restoration project brought them back to life in 1951. If you were out walking in the forests of Zelizy, Czechia and came across the gigantic, terrifying sculptures known as the Devil's Heads, you'd probably be more than a little frightened. We don't know if it would be any consolation to anybody in those circumstances, but they used to look even more frightening than they do today. The 2 gruesome faces look out over a small village, visible from anywhere within its streets. The faces have been carved directly into the stone, supremely detailed in every way, save for the fact that there are hollows where their eyes ought to be. That only adds to the creep-out factor. The 30-foot-tall sculptures are the work of local artist Vaclav Levy, who went about his work in the mid-19th century. Nobody really knows why he did this, or even if he had permission from local authorities, but he seems to have been a fan of dark fantasies. Other examples of his work in the area include scenes from the tales of the Brothers Grimm, carved into rock faces, and artificial caves cut out of the cliffs. There are two things you ought to know before you visit Lude's Church in Staffordshire, England. The first is that the rocks are mossy, slippy, and hazardous. The second is that almost every mythical figure in British folklore is said to have visited here at some point during their imagined lives. Sir Gawain, one of the knights of King Arthur's Round Table, is said to have been sent here to be executed in the so-called Green Chapel. Robin Hood is claimed as a visitor too. See, we told you during our introduction that finding connections to Robin Hood in a forest might not be as unlikely as you think. Lude's Church is a natural chasm and is only called a church because of a Christian sect who allegedly used it as a safe place for secret meetings in the 15th century. The Green Chapel is actually the cleft of the chasm. While Sir Gawain may not have existed, the place where he narrowly avoided his fate most definitely does. While most of England has changed and evolved around it, Lude's Church still looks exactly the same way it did more than 1,000 years ago. Subscribe to the channel, turn on the notification bell, and enjoy watching new videos on my channel. Thanks for watching and see you soon!